In 1945, the world was burning. A Swedish banking dynasty had just been accused of laundering Nazi gold. Their most famous relative disappeared into Soviet custody, never to return. And yet, that same family quietly built a $250 billion empire that still dominates today. How? Because while most families lost everything during the war, the Wallenbergs played a game no one else understood. A game where being on both sides wasn't betrayal. It was strategy. But to understand how one family survived every twist of 20th century chaos while others collapsed, we need to go back. Back to a small Swedish bank, before it became one of the most powerful financial machines the world has ever seen. The year was 1856. André Oscar Wallenberg stepped off a ship from America, not with gold or glory, but with a book. A book on banking that would inspire one man to reshape an entire nation's economy. Because while the world was racing toward industrial revolution, Sweden was stuck, rich in natural resources but poor in capital. Businesses couldn't grow. Entrepreneurs had ideas but no money. And the average Swede had no access to banking and no safe place to save. André Oscar saw all of it and saw opportunity. So he did what no one else dared. He founded Stockholm Enskilda Bank, Sweden's first private bank. And just like that, the Wallenberg dynasty began. But this wasn't just a bank. It was a financial engine that pulled capital from the pockets of ordinary citizens and funneled it directly into Sweden's industrial core. Factories were built, railways laid, and with every loan, every investment, the Wallenbergs weren't just funding the economy, they were embedding themselves in it. By the late 1800s, André's son, Knut Agathon Wallenberg, took the reins. And he wasn't just a banker, he was a strategist. Under Knut's leadership, SEB went global. New connections in Europe and America. And just when war engulfed the continent in 1914, Knut made his boldest move yet. He became Sweden's foreign minister. Imagine one man steering his country's diplomacy during World War I while simultaneously running its most powerful financial institution. That's not influence. That's control. In 1917, he and his wife founded the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, a philanthropic giant disguised as a soft power machine. While others gave charity for reputation, the Wallenbergs built legacies that lasted generations. But it was in 1916 that they revealed their most brilliant adaptation yet. New Swedish laws had just banned banks from holding industrial shares long-term. Other banks folded. The Wallenbergs? They simply created Investor AB, a holding company that allowed them to keep control, legally. This wasn't law-breaking, it was law-bending, the kind only the most powerful can afford. At the heart of their entire strategy was a simple motto, esse, non videre. To be, not to be seen. The Wallenbergs never chased the spotlight. They didn't want headlines, they wanted leverage. Quiet, invisible leverage across Atlas Copco, Saab, Electrolux, and dozens of other titans. By the 1930s, they'd built something that most families never manage. A dynasty that endured, not through dominance, but through adaptability. But even the most resilient empires eventually face a test. And for the Wallenbergs, that test would come under the shadow of swastikas and war. Because playing both sides of history's darkest chapter is a strategy that few survive. What if the secret to surviving a global war was sending your brother to work with Hitler? It sounds unthinkable, right? Well, for Jacob and Marcus Wallenberg Jr., it was a strategy. By the time World War II ignited Europe, these two brothers controlled one of the most powerful financial networks in the Western world. Jacob led Stockholm and Skilda Bank as CEO. Marcus Jr. stood beside him as deputy. Sweden, officially neutral. But the Wallenbergs were anything but passive. Their solution wasn't to avoid the war. It was to play the war. Jacob, the elder brother, would cultivate close ties with Nazi Germany. Officially, he was Sweden's trade envoy. Unofficially, he was brokering deals that kept Hitler's war machine fueled with Swedish iron ore, critical for making German steel. And his meetings? They weren't small talks. He sat across from Nazi officials at high-level negotiations, shaking hands while the Reich expanded its front lines. Marcus, meanwhile, turned west, strengthening connections with Britain and America, ensuring the family was protected if the Allies won. They weren't just neutral, they were two-faced by design. While the world saw Sweden as a cautious bystander, the Wallenberg brothers were engaged in the most calculated hedge in wartime history. No matter who won, they'd already aligned themselves on both sides. But it went deeper than trade. Documents later uncovered show that Stockholm and Skilda Bank helped transfer assets seized from Jewish families. Gold, property, bank accounts. Looted wealth moved quietly through a neutral bank in Stockholm, cleaned, converted, and never traced back. Because the Swedish flag was a convenient disguise. Jacob's dealings with Nazi Germany weren't rogue, they were coordinated. They fit perfectly within the brothers' larger plan. An invisible handshake between enemy powers, facilitated by the Wallenbergs' empire. It's a business maneuver so coldly brilliant, it's hard to separate the strategy from the scandal. Most wartime businesses had to gamble, choose a side, and hope for the best. The Wallenbergs? They built a structure where both sides were assets. They collected fees, commissions, and favors, all while appearing as loyal Swedish citizens preserving the national economy. By 1945, much of Europe's financial elite had been obliterated. But the Wallenbergs, they'd thrived. Their banks were stronger, their holding companies more valuable, their influence untouchable. And they hadn't chosen a side. They'd mastered both. But every hedge has a cost. How do you profit from genocide and keep your hands clean? The Wallenbergs had an answer, and it was chillingly practical. When a family walks both sides of a war, someone has to play the hero. And for the Wallenbergs, that man was Raoul. In the final year of World War II, as Europe burned and Nazi Germany began to buckle, the Wallenberg family made a move that defied their financial logic. Or maybe redefined it. They sent Raoul Wallenberg, a young diplomat with no experience in covert missions, into the very heart of Hitler's machinery. Hungary's Jewish population was days from destruction. Adolf Eichmann had turned genocide into a timetable, deporting 12,000 Jews per day. By the time Raoul arrived in Budapest, nearly 400,000 Hungarian Jews were already gone. What he did next became legend. Armed with nothing but his last name, a briefcase of paper, and sheer conviction, Raoul launched one of the boldest rescue operations of the Holocaust. No guns, no soldiers, just documents. These protective passports were legal fiction, but they looked real enough to scare the Nazis. They bore Sweden's insignia and declared their bearer under Swedish protection. The Nazis, obsessed with hierarchy and paperwork, hesitated. Raoul didn't just sit in an office stamping papers. He boarded the trains headed for Auschwitz, pulled Jews off the cattle cars, and shouted so loudly in the name of Sweden that even the SS backed off. His genius was using the enemy's own system against itself, weaponizing paperwork in a world ruled by bureaucracy. But his brilliance didn't stop there. He built an entire shadow network, 32 Swedish houses across Budapest, apartment buildings draped in Swedish flags, each one a sanctuary for those marked for death. Inside these shelters, Over 15,000 people, alive, only because one man decided to act. But Raoul's real superpower wasn't courage, it was access. He could sit across from Nazi officials because his cousin Jacob already had relationships in place. He gained trust with Allied sympathizers because his family held influence on that side too. Raoul moved in the gaps, where no one else could, where only a Wallenberg could. So, was it moral redemption or calculated optics? That's the question historians still ask, because by 1944 the Wallenberg brand was at risk. Their Nazi-era dealings were no longer rumors, and with the Allies closing in, their financial empire needed insulation. Fast. Raoul's mission may have offered that moral buffer, a humanitarian legacy to counterbalance a decade of dark transactions. But this wasn't a feel-good ending. When Soviet troops arrived in January 1945, they arrested Raoul on suspicion of espionage, and just like that, he vanished into the Soviet prison system. Moscow denied knowing his whereabouts. Later, they claimed he died of a heart attack in 1947. Most historians don't believe that. And here's where it gets murkier. The Wallenbergs had extensive Soviet business ties. So why didn't they push harder for Raoul's release? Was it fear of what might come out if they did? Some speculate the family remained deliberately quiet, choosing to protect their empire instead of their kin. One man went to save lives and never came back. But the dynasty, it kept growing. And as the dust settled, the Wallenbergs' financial empire was about to face scrutiny from a direction they hadn't calculated for: the United States Treasury. One brother helped the Reich, one helped the Allies, and one man became a martyr. It was a perfect triangle of power, protection, and sacrifice. It was supposed to be the end of the war. But for the Wallenbergs, it was the beginning of their reckoning. When American forces swept into Stuttgart in 1945, they weren't just searching for weapons, they were looking for evidence. And in the vaults of captured Nazi officials, they found it. A paper trail of secret deals, coded bank records, and a name that shouldn't have been there. Stockholm and Skilda Bank, the same institution behind Raoul Wallenberg's heroic rescue mission, now tied to laundering Nazi gold. The Wallenberg image, polished, heroic, neutral, shattered overnight. Between 1945 and 1947, the U.S. Treasury blacklisted the Wallenberg family, labeling them Special Bloc Nationals. Translation: they were financial outcasts, frozen out of American markets, their banking network paralyzed. By 1947, the Wallenbergs were no longer blacklisted. How? Enter Marcus Wallenberg Jr., the quiet diplomat, the Allied-facing brother. While Jacob had built the Nazi side of the strategy, Marcus had been building the escape plan. Step 1. Reframe the narrative. They made Raoul the symbol, the hero. His image, his story, was everywhere. They didn't have to say the words. They just let the public ask, how could the family of Raoul Wallenberg also be Nazi collaborators? Step 2. Rebrand the crime as necessity. They claimed neutrality. They claimed obligation. They claimed they had no choice but to deal with both sides. And then, they flipped the script. The Wallenbergs made themselves indispensable to the post-war world. They offered capital, they offered factories, they offered leverage at scale. While still technically under sanctions, they brokered a $250 million loan to the Soviets. Yes, while Raoul was still missing in a Soviet prison. The message was clear. This family doesn't dwell on emotions, they do deals. Western powers needed to rebuild, and the Wallenbergs had the manufacturing muscle to do it. Washington blinked. They survived. But something changed. The moral contradictions remained unresolved. Raoul was still gone. The war crimes still documented. But the family's power? Only growing. As the Cold War dawned, the world would soon forget the paperwork in Stuttgart. And the Wallenbergs, they were already preparing to fight a new kind of war, against time itself. Because there's one enemy even billionaires can't bribe or outmaneuver: succession. After surviving war crimes allegations, Cold War sanctions, and the moral chaos of World War II, the Wallenbergs faced a different kind of enemy. One that has destroyed fortunes far larger than theirs: mathematics. There's a phrase that haunts every wealthy dynasty: shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first builds, the second preserves, the third squanders. But somehow, the Wallenbergs didn't just survive it. They cracked the code. Their solution? A financial fortress that would preserve their empire for over a century without technically owning a single krona of it. It's a pattern as old as wealth itself. The founder sacrifices everything to build. The second generation watches, learns, maintains. But the third, born into marble halls with no memory of struggle, they're usually the ones who lose it all. And taxes don't help. But in 1917, while much of Europe was collapsing, the Wallenbergs were laying a trap for time itself. They created the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation. At first glance, a charitable trust. In reality, a dynastic machine. On paper, it funds scientific research and medicine. In practice, it's one of the world's most effective wealth preservation vehicles. It solved 3 problems at once. It bypassed inheritance taxes. It protected the fortune from heirs with champagne tastes. It gave the family control of their empire, without owning it. Instead of passing down shares, they passed down control. Foundations, not individuals, own Sweden's industrial giants. And those foundations are run by boards. Boards filled with Wallenbergs. They manage over $30 billion in assets. Companies like Electrolux, Atlas Copco, and Saab AB are all part of the network. A quiet empire masquerading as philanthropy. Family members are paid salaries, but they can't sell shares. They can't raid accounts. The capital stays locked in the system, growing, compounding, invisible. And that invisibility, it's not a side effect, it's the strategy. Despite controlling nearly 40% of Sweden's stock market, you won't see the Wallenbergs on Forbes. There are no yachts on Instagram, no flashy interviews, no net worth charts. Because when the world can't see you, it doesn't come for you. 5 generations after André Oscar Wallenberg opened Sweden's first private bank, his descendants still sit at the center of a hidden empire. What began as a clever tax maneuver became an economic stronghold. They didn't just preserve wealth, they weaponized it against time, taxation, and family decay. But this vault of control, this fortress of foundations, did more than protect the past. It shaped the future, because in the next chapter you'll see how the Wallenbergs use this power not just to survive, but to reshape nations. If you've ever taken AstraZeneca medication, dialed through an Ericsson network, or used an Electrolux appliance, you've already touched the invisible hand of the Wallenbergs. You just didn't know it. Today, 3 men, Marcus, Jacob, and Peter Wallenberg Jr., quietly control an empire worth over $250 billion. Not through glitzy boardrooms, not through politics or Instagram, but through foundations, holdings, and legacy systems so complex, it takes a diagram to explain how the money flows. These are the descendants of a banker who once read a book in America and came home to reinvent a nation. Now they're quietly steering industries, healthcare, defense, technology from behind the veil. They live by a code etched into their family DNA: esse non videre, to be, not to be seen. That motto isn't just a philosophy, it's a strategy. Their flagship company, investor AB, holds powerful stakes in global titans, ABB, Saab, and dozens of others. These aren't passive investments, they're command posts. Each one positions the Wallenbergs not as participants, but as architects of the global economy. And yet, they remain ghosts in the headlines. Their names don't trend. Their faces don't flood magazines. They aren't influencers. Because in a world obsessed with visibility, the Wallenbergs have weaponized invisibility. In Sweden, however, they're anything but invisible. They're called kingmakers. Their influence is so entrenched that no government, left or right, ignores them. Their economic decisions can restructure industries. Their philanthropic arms fund the future. And behind closed doors, they help shape national policies without ever stepping into office. Unlike billionaires who chase attention, the Wallenbergs move beside power, not through it. No speeches, no elections, just strategic relationships, and influence by proximity. And it's not stopping with them. The sixth generation is already in training. They're groomed through secret apprenticeships, placed inside key companies across the empire, learning the system from the inside, learning the rules so they can write them. This isn't just succession, it's dynastic programming. The Wallenbergs have designed the ultimate hybrid, a machine where professional managers run daily operations while strategic control stays locked in family hands. It's a system built not just to last, but to endure unnoticed. They hold no political office. Yet every policy bends around them. They appear on no billionaire lists. Yet their fingerprints are everywhere. So next time someone asks you, who really runs the world? You might want to check behind the boardroom curtain, because the most powerful people aren't always the loudest. The Wallenbergs didn't just build a fortune. They engineered a formula, a financial blueprint so airtight, it's now being copied by quiet dynasties across Switzerland, Singapore, and Silicon Valley. And they did it all while staying invisible. And perhaps, most intriguingly, they've taught the world something uncomfortable. That neutrality isn't always passive. Sometimes it's the sharpest weapon in the room. The Wallenbergs walk the line between Nazi collaborators and allied partners, between moral icons and financial opportunists, between public service and private empire. So now we ask you, is this the most brilliant business strategy in modern history, or one of the most chilling examples of power without accountability? Drop your thoughts in the comments.